Welcome to the Cybersecurity podcast from Lightspeed, where we sit down with founders, CEOs, and visionaries building the next era of cybersecurity. I'm your host, Lightspeed partner Guru Chahal. Today I'm speaking with Dan Lorenc, co-founder and CEO of Chainguard. Dan left a leadership role at Google where he helped shape core projects like Kubernetes and SigStore to build a company tackling one of the most complex problems in cybersecurity, securing the foundation of your software. Since launching Chainguard in 2021, Dan and his team have built one of the fastest growing companies in cybersecurity. Today's conversation will unpack why he believes a first principles approach to making open source software secure by default is needed.
The only way to really make it work for what enterprises and people needed was to build our own distro. We built a Linux distro designed to be run in a distroless environment where every container was different. It had only what it needed. You weren't starting from this big base that tried to serve every workload and every purpose.
How Chainguard is navigating the rise of AI-generated code.
And the bottleneck today isn't writing code anymore. It's reviewing code and making sure it's safe and making sure it's secure and making sure people understand it. And so maintainers and projects are getting swamped with fake bug reports and thousands of pull requests that don't make any sense. If you take the volume that we've been seeing and the growth that we've been seeing, and then all of a sudden put another zero on it, the way code is managed and developed and built and tested and reviewed and verified just stops working.
And what it means to lead a fast-growing company while maintaining company culture.
My hot take here is, remote is actually pretty easy. It gets hard with scale and with growth though, because you still have to get together and build culture together and get to know each other, off of a Zoom call and off of a screen. And that's really important. And we do that twice a year at Chainguard. We get the whole company together. Our last one was just a few weeks ago, and it's always a great week. But then you have 10 people join the week after that, and they have to wait 5 more months for the next one and to get to meet their coworkers. So it kind of, the rapid growth plus remote has been a challenge.
Dan, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me on.
So let's start from the top. You left Google. You're in a great position. You've got access to incredible resources. You're working on some projects that have massive impact. And you decide to leave all of that and start Chainguard rather than building this perhaps internally with Google, with its resources, and maybe having a broader impact. Share with us a little bit about what led to that moment where you're like, you know what, I'm going to go out and I'm going to build this independently.
Yeah, there was no carefully thought through plan or weighed out decision or anything like that. I was at Google for about 10 years and I was happy there. My co-founder, Matt, our CTO, had left Google sometime during the pandemic, and he just took a sabbatical and took a bunch of time off. And the space started heating up, and I kept texting him to try to get him to come back to work. And one day he finally texted and said he was ready to work again. He was done barbecuing. That's what he was doing on his sabbatical. But instead of coming back to Google, would I just quit and start a company with him? And I think that was on like a Thursday or something like that. And I knew if I thought about it too much, I would probably talk myself out of it for all those reasons you just listed. So I didn't think about it. I just decided, that seems like a good idea. I quit, and we figured out how to start a company after that.
That's amazing. It's not going to surprise you. So many other founder journeys start like that. They're just this impulse, but the impulse has been building up for a very, very long time because you just see something and you're like, I can fix that. Before we dig too deep into exactly what you set out to build, just lay the foundation, please. What is software supply chain? Why is it important? Why were you focused on that at Google? And why did you then build that conviction that, this is a big problem, it's worth working on outside?
Yeah, software supply chain security is about securing the way your software gets built. It's around securing all the components, all the dependencies, all the libraries, all the build systems, all the things that go into getting a unit of software runnable, where it actually adds value to customers. The security industry for decades has known about this problem. There's a famous paper from the 1970s by Ken Thompson called Reflections on Trusting Trust, where he pranked all of his coworkers at Bell Labs by putting a backdoor into a compiler that hit itself and also self-propagated, and nobody could figure it out. And he kind of gave this in one of his award acceptance speeches, talked about it. Everyone panicked and then just blocked it out of their memories because it was so terrifying. And if you haven't built the first piece of software that builds every piece of software after that, you don't really have much trust in any computing that we're doing today. But it's been so far down the stack on what security practitioners and what people worry about every day because there's so much other low-hanging fruit in the industry. Security, like all other fields, kind of plays catch up. Security professionals are left chasing after whatever attackers are actually focused on. And Google always had to be a little bit farther ahead in that curve because Google had some of the most sensitive data in the world: location history, search history, browser history for billions of people. So Google was always a few years ahead because the attackers targeting them were more sophisticated and coming after more valuable data. And so Google was worried about this for a while, in particular the open source piece, which fits in. Open source code is everywhere. It's written by strangers on the internet, which is great, but it's also terrifying. And so Google was worried about this for a while, but it wasn't a broader industry problem until the attack on SolarWinds at the end of 2020. Which sort of shifted the narrative from not only do the biggest hyperscalers out there with the most sensitive data have to worry about this, but anyone that sells software to anyone that sells software to anyone that has very sensitive data now has to worry about this because you're now in the crosshairs of these nation states. And that was a big wake-up moment for the industry. And I'd been working on it for a while, and it was one of those things where it felt like nobody cared, and you're kind of pushing a boulder up a hill. And then after that attack, all of a sudden the boulder started rolling faster and faster and faster down the hill, and it felt like right place, right time.
I think most people don't realize when we write software applications and run those in an enterprise, 80 to 95% of the code is not written by us. It just gets pulled in by strangers on the internet, like you said. And so that sounds like a really big sort of hairy problem. So you leave Google, you've been thinking about this problem, you start building. No journey is a straight line. And I'm sure there were multiple sort of paths. I remember a discussion with you in the early days, very, very early days. You just gotten into revenue and you looked at the number and said, Guru, take half of this number, just disregard it. We're going to get out of that business. It's this other business we're much more excited about. We're going to get there. So I'm sure there were multiple twists and turns. Talk us through that journey of coming up with a thesis and then eventually getting to product market fit.
Yeah, when we started the company, we didn't know what type of product we wanted to build. We knew we wanted to do something and solve some problems in this space, but it's a very hairy, messy space. I'm sure you probably still see it. We get compared to SCA tools and scanners and things that flag malware and people that host artifacts and all these different things in this space that are all links in the supply chain, and they do all need to be secured. So it took us a while to figure out how we wanted to bite apart this problem and how we wanted to come at it. In the beginning, we actually tried two completely separate things at the same time to see which would get us to product market fit, which one would resonate first. And we got pulled the wrong direction early on. We built one of those tools that helped organizations visualize their supply chain and try to apply controls and tell them where it was weak and how they could improve it. We got pulled the wrong way there. We were doing both at the same time, but that one, we had our first deals on that. I think a couple million in ARR on it. And then the other product that we're still selling today, our containers product, was a little bit slower to get going. It took a lot longer to build. But once we got it out there, it was night and day. You could feel the pull from the market rather than us pushing. And those first couple of customers we onboarded, they weren't happy with it. They didn't even finish deployments. Looking back, it's kind of obvious. It was a product that made it harder for developers to do their job, which was kind of the point. They shouldn't be able to just do whatever they want and get software into production if you want to do things securely. But it's hard to get them to roll something out that makes their job harder. Our other product kind of threaded that needle where it makes developers' lives easier while still improving security outcomes.
Did it take a long time? Because it's a big decision to say several $100,000, maybe $500,000 to $1 million. I'm going to ignore this revenue. I'm going to sunset this product, especially at that stage. But it feels like you have some product market fit, even if it's not fast growing. Was that a hard decision? How long did it take to make that call?
Probably about a quarter, start to finish. It's enterprise sales cycles. It's slow. You get a lot of, we would like this, but until you get an order form in front and actually get it through procurement, you don't really know. So about a quarter, start to finish. And reality was what forced us to do it. We didn't have enough resources to keep supporting both. And so it was, looking at the data, looking at the numbers, knowing what we could do with our team. And we had to make that call just to shift all resources over to the one that was blowing up in demand.
Yeah. Let's dig into that early product a little bit, because I've never seen pull like this from the market. In fact, I remember the first time you shared what you're going to focus on, open source software, containers, secure by default. It kind of blew my mind. Walk us through that journey. That whole message about distroless container images was so contrarian. When people were just putting patches upon patches upon patches, your message was, I'm going to give you something. I'm going to make you a promise. It's going to be patched and secure by default for as long as we're in business with you. So talk to us through that initial container product.
Yeah. So my co-founder, Matt, and I at Google, we had spent a while working on this problem, trying to figure out how to build containers that would be secure for Google to use. And one of those projects we'd started was this GitHub project called distroless. We put it together over a weekend or something like that. Matt came up with that amazing name, distroless, which is completely inaccurate, but it's catchy. And when you have a name like that, people love to complain about it, which means it gets even more attention. But the way that first version of it worked was we took an existing distro, Debian, and deleted some of the files. So it wasn't really distroless. It was Debian just with some of the stuff deleted outside of it. And it worked, and tons of people were using it, but it had a lot of limits that we ran into. We realized the only way, once we started Chainguard, we were looking back at that, and we realized the only way to really scale that and make it work for what enterprises and people needed was to build our own distro, to build a distro designed for distroless. And
Distro.
And so when we announced that one too, we came up with another terrible name. We called it an undistro because we couldn't figure out what to call it. And of course, it got a ton of complaints, and that meant everyone was talking about it. But we built a Linux distro designed to be run in a distroless environment where every container was different. It had only what it needed. You weren't starting from this big base that tried to serve every workload and every purpose.
Yeah. But that wasn't the mission. The mission of the company was all open source software, we're going to secure it. So you start with containers.
Yeah.
How does the expansion go? How do you expand the product from there? What was the next big step?
We talk about today, we want to be the safe source for all open source. Containers were a great place to start because they're a standard unit. Everyone is running them today. They're terribly insecure, not for any reason of their own. They sit at the end of a supply chain. The way you install software into a container is through every other package manager and installation mechanism out there, which is why they gain so much adoption. They're very universal, but they sit at the end and inherit all the risks of every other tool that's ever been invented in the way software gets built and packaged. So we figured we would start there based on the market, where people were deploying them. And I was sort of shocked. I didn't even realize how broadly containers had been deployed. And today, our software is running in the F-35. I have no idea who put Kubernetes in the F-35, but someone did, and they love it up there. Some of that has been a bit of a shock to us and kind of explains why we've had so much market pull.
I mean, the message is really simple, right? Correct me if I'm wrong. Your promise to me as an enterprise is, if I buy this container, get the source this container from you, I don't need to worry about future CVEs, these new vulnerabilities that are found, and figure out how to patch it and so on. Chainguard takes away all of this complexity. That container that is sourced from you is secure by default for as long as I keep using it.
Yeah, and the way this all works is we've built a ton of automation in our own operating system, basically. We called it an undistro early on. It's a whole set of software packages where we build it all from source and have automation to constantly update it and fix these vulnerabilities. When you look at what we do, probably about 95% of it has nothing to do with containers. At the very end, we just kind of assemble them into containers and package them up and sell and ship those to our customers. All of the hard work goes into everything before it gets turned into a container. The container piece is relatively easy, but it's only possible because of all of that work we've done further upstream in these supply chains.
Right.
When you get a container, there might be, one application in it you're trying to use, say it's some database, but there's 1,000 other dependencies in there to make that database work.
And so you're doing all this hard work upstream.
Yeah.
You figure out what are the vulnerabilities people are finding. You patch them. You build secure software every day. The first iteration of the product, you productize it as a container. Next one, VMs?
Yeah, VMs and language libraries. We're trying to do all open source out there in every format that people are consuming it. So earlier this year, we announced 2 new product lines, virtual machines, another way people run open source software, and language level libraries, the pieces that they actually pull into their applications themselves.
That's huge. Talk to us. I mean, we've seen some NPM attacks recently. Talk to us through that whole journey of NPM attacks and the Chainguard libraries and how that pull also came to Chainguard from the market.
Yeah. When you look at the open source landscape and the way people consume software, language level libraries have been a problem for a very long time. Right. They appeared like 20 or so years ago with the Python package registry, Maven Central. There's stuff that predate that with like Perl and things. But they came out of a problem where Linux distros did a pretty good job packaging system level dependencies back then. But there was so much more software where people were trying to write in these new programming languages that just didn't make sense to fit into a Linux distro. They moved too quick. They changed too often. They had too many dependencies. Linux distros wouldn't touch them. So these language level package managers appeared, and they have commands that look almost the same as the Linux distro ones, but the security guarantees behind them are completely different. When you run apt-get install, if you're on some Debian distro, and if you run pip install, it looks the same, but the security trade-offs are night and day. One is you're getting a curated set of packages from someone that updates them infrequently and patches things for you. The other one is you're getting thousands of things from thousands of different people with no guarantees or promises or security at all. That is another space attackers have started hitting recently. The Python package registry only rolled out two-factor auth a year ago, and it's optional. Very, very few people have turned this on. It was one of the things I was working on at Google, trying to encourage folks to turn this thing on. And it's hard when it's run by a community and a nonprofit. And you think it's easy, but like there's tens of thousands of people committing code to these daily in their spare time, and even just staffing a support team to deal with the resets when you lose your token. Right? This is not cheap to turn on or to roll out for these ecosystems. Yeah. You can't even buy a plane ticket or log into a bank account without two-factor auth these days, but you can publish code that is used by thousands of people and run in probably those same flight systems and those same ATMs without using two-factor auth. So every week we've seen huge malware attacks across all these package ecosystems where you're one password leak away from having root access to everyone using this package.
Feels like eating in a really nice restaurant, a great day, having no idea where the ingredient came from.
Yeah. The analogy I always used to tell was, running pip install is like picking up a thumb drive you found outside of work, bringing it inside and plugging it right into your production server and executing the code on it.
Sorry, what's wrong with that? It's free software, Dad.
Aren't you a regulated entity? Don't you have security training? Yeah.
Fair enough. Touché. All right. One of the arguments we have constantly is I think of Chainguard as an incredible cybersecurity company. You disagree? You think of Chainguard as an incredible software company. Now, you've taken on the harder problems and not selling to compliance, not necessarily even selling to cybersecurity teams, although you do, but winning over developers first. Very few cybersecurity companies have been actually able to thread that needle. Talk to us about that decision and what convinced you that going through the developers, winning them over first is the right path to build your go-to-market?
Yeah, there's a couple of reasons for that one. First of all, we tried selling to security. We tried that early on. Supply chain security is a bit of a mess, though, because it's something CISOs care about and they feel and they're on the hook for. But to fix it requires getting developers to change the way they do their jobs. There's not another tool you can bolt on in a security team to magically fix these issues. You have to change the way developers write and build and ship code. And so we tried selling to CISOs early on. That was the original plan. They love spending money. Developers hate spending money. They want to build everything themselves. It worked a couple times. We still do it occasionally. What we found was like those were the riskiest deals. We'd get the deal signed, and then the security team would go and tell the development teams, "Hey, we bought this thing. You now have to do this." Developers hate being told what to do, especially by security. You're now 6 months into a 12-month contract before they get it on their roadmap. If somebody leaves, quits the company, all of a sudden the renewal's at risk because development wasn't bought in. They didn't understand why this was happening at the start. And after a couple of quarters of this, we went back and looked, and the most successful deals we'd had and the happiest customers were the ones where the development teams actually paid. It came out of their budget. And so we pivoted the go-to-market strategy around that. It's more work upfront to get developers to buy in because they're fixing someone else's problem. But once that's done and they see the value, then the rollout is done immediately when the deal is closed because the POV was successful and you got the resources allocated upfront and everyone aligned around why and how to do this change.
Do you see this now do you see a pattern now where the security teams actually later on come back and was like, thank you, Chainguard, because this is having an impact in security operations downstream?
Yeah, our first call is still usually with the security teams. So they're the ones that feel this. They're the ones looking for solutions. The pitch in a lot of those is, hey, we're going to solve this problem for you, and you're not even going to have to pay for it. Yeah. Imagine that. Your engineering team is going to pay for it, and they're going to like you for making the intro. Yeah. They're always involved. If security said no, we would never have a deal. But security loves the product too. Yeah.
We can't not talk about AI. Yes. So let's dig into that a little bit more. Now, the most obvious thing, your goal is to secure all of open source. AI's initial impact is in code generation, vast amounts of which is going to open source. Talk to us about that dynamic. AI generating massive amounts of code. How does this AI-generated code change that supply chain security dynamic? And what role does Chainguard play there?
Yeah, AI has already had a huge impact on open source in general. The volume of code that can be spit out is just massive. I do it all the time. I'm machine running Claude code right now, vibe coding somewhere. Thank you. Sending commits places. Yeah, I love it. But a lot of the systems that make open source and software development work in general are designed around people reviewing things. And the bottleneck today isn't writing code anymore. That's what it used to be. It's reviewing code and making sure it's safe and making sure it's secure and making sure people understand it. And in open source, you have a lot less resources anyway for that. And so maintainers and projects are getting swamped with fake bug reports and thousands of pull requests that don't make any sense. And there's whole new projects spinning up where AI is writing the entire thing. And so what we're seeing is kind of this phase shift where if you take the volume that we've been seeing and the growth that we've been seeing, and then all of a sudden put another zero on it, the way code is managed and developed and built and tested and reviewed and verified just stops working. You can't just scale that up by a factor of 10 overnight. So things are breaking. Attackers are taking advantage of this with more sophisticated malware campaigns, publishing thousands of sophisticated lookalike repositories to make it even harder for you to tell if you're getting something trustworthy. The curl project, one of the most commonly used HTTP libraries in the world, they're getting DDoSed with fake vulnerability reports from people just trying to claim like $100 HackerOne credits to put on their profiles. They're just, pointing agents and saying, find a vulnerability and sending it right at the maintainer. And he was used to dealing with, 5 or 6 a week. Now it's 50 to 60 a week, and he can't review these. And so they're going to be missing real ones in there, drowning through all of this noise. And so right now what we're just seeing is more code. All code has security problems. The more code you have, the more security problems we're going to have. And people haven't figured out how to accurately and reliably use it to help scale the other side of that, the review and the maintenance and the security.
Yeah. So software supply chain security actually becomes a bigger problem with AI.
I think, it's definitely going to be a bigger problem. AI is going to be the cause of and solution to all of our problems here. It's just going to be a while before we get to the solution to part.
I like this framing. While we're figuring out how do you make sure that the AI-generated code itself is secure, Chainguard becomes sort of that great filter on the other side of which is secure code. Utilizing the libraries and the containers and VMs from Chainguard at least gives enterprises a sense of comfort around, okay, at least I have secure code by default right now while we figure out how to solve sort of this complexity of more and more open source. AI-generated code.
Yeah. It's this, open source is this amazing community swimming pool we're all swimming in and having fun. And somebody in a corner somewhere is just, peeing into that pool. And, when you go into a big pool, somebody's doing it. But at some point, all of a sudden, the pool's going to be a little warm and yellow, and you're not going to want to get in there anymore. And so we're trying to build this other smaller one off to the side that, we're keeping clean and chlorinating.
I like that example more. It's going to stay with me for a while. All right, let's talk about how internally you're able to use AI at Chainguard.
My Twitter background right now is this quote that I love. It's the programmer's credo. It says, we do these things not because they are easy, but because we thought they were going to be when we started. Many great pieces of software have been started that way. People have tried to do what we're doing and build all of this open source before. Not all of it was possible before. And we tried, and we've had to figure out how to scale things, every week and every month as we add more and more software to this, things keep breaking. But I think we've done this at a perfect time because a lot of what we try to do, especially with libraries where PyPI has 3 million software packages. We've been maintaining hundreds of thousands up until this point. It probably wouldn't have been possible when we first started. We're at this place on the curve where things are becoming possible every week, every month. They weren't possible last week, last month. And we're having to figure out how to do this and how to use these tools safely and securely, but in a way that allows us to scale and to do what we're trying to do here.
Let's dig in perhaps a little bit more into your background. You're an engineer. You're a technologist. You still code.
Claude does it for me now. Yeah.
Claude codes for you now, but you're building one of the most amazing, ambitious platforms in software today. Walk us through, please. How have you had to evolve your leadership style and working style from being a technologist focused on building technology inside Google to now being a CEO running a vast company?
A company is it's a whole system of systems that are all running and operating at the same time and failing and needing debugging and needing optimization all at the same time. My background is actually mechanical engineering. I never studied software. I had to take a MATLAB class at some point in undergrad and realized programming was a lot more fun, but it was too late to switch majors. So that's how I got into this field. But I think that background, I think, has really helped a lot. It's abstract systems and modeling and figuring out how to make all these complex things, especially when you have no background in them, make sense. And I love that part of the job. People ask all the time, do I miss writing code? Do I miss that stuff? And a little bit, but now with Claude, I can still write code. But debugging and building and learning about all these other parts of the business has been even more fun in many ways. Learning how go-to-market works. From someone that only experience with sales was getting those people trying to sell you term life insurance, calling you every day and every weekend before. That's been a lot of fun. It's a whole different skill set. It's a whole different mindset. But it's been a great experience.
One of my favorite memories is I remember doing a pipeline review with you. This is probably a couple of years ago. And I would ask a question, and before your president and CRO at the time would answer, you would answer that question. I think that kind of deep curiosity is rare to find, which certainly I wanted to highlight because, that transition from technologist to a business leader is so important, but it really is rooted in this fundamental curiosity, like you said, about go-to-market. How does it work? And sales and compensation planning and marketing. A disinterest in that can be a huge disservice to the company. Another thing that stood out, you started the company 2021.
Yep.
Remote was all the rage.
Yeah. It was the only option. Yeah.
It was the only option. We've seen a bit of a snapback. Yet Chainguard is a company, you made it work. You've had a very strong culture inside the firm, and you've been able to scale. You have an incredibly fast-growing business. How? What did you do differently from so many other peers, so many other companies that couldn't get it to work, and frankly are snapping back to more of an in-office culture?
Well, like you mentioned, we started in 2021. No one was in offices. There was still in the pandemic, and it wasn't really something we thought through. We didn't sit around and think, should we be in offices? Should we be remote? We weren't as deliberate about it as we should have been, because it was the only way to build a company then, or to even work at any company. And we've scaled throughout that. And yeah, right now we're witnessing a lot of companies head back to offices and kind of that culture. A lot of the way we've operated has kind of been shaped by my time at Google. Google was mostly an office company until the pandemic, but they didn't really care which office you were in. I was in the downtown San Francisco office. I had colleagues in Mountain View and tons of colleagues here in New York. If you've ever been in the New York office here, it's massive. It's a whole city block, and people in that office wouldn't even see each other. They would take calls from their desks, even if they were on a different floor. And so it was kind of a remote culture, but you had to commute to work each day. So it's kind of the worst of both worlds. But the whole company operated. They didn't have a functioning chat system back then. If you remember Slack blowing up out of nowhere and the 7 different Google messaging apps that appeared and everything, there was no functioning chat. It was all email and document and written communication. And so when the pandemic happened, things just got faster because people skipped the commute and not much else changed because people knew how to communicate and collaborate asynchronously and in written form. Building a company, it has been challenging with that. And I think the hard part is, my hot take here is, remote is actually pretty easy. It gets hard with scale and with growth though, because you do still have to get together and build culture together and get to know each other, off of a Zoom call and off of a screen. And that's really important. And we do that twice a year at Chainguard. We had the whole company together. Our last one was just a few weeks ago. And it's always a great week. But then you have 10 people join the week after that, and they have to wait 5 more months to for the next one and to get to meet their coworkers. So it kind of the rapid growth plus remote has been a challenge, and it's something we just have to spend a lot of time on.
And if we take it all the way back to your leadership team, talk to us a bit more about your leadership style. I mean, Jensen famously has 50 reports or something. Yeah. Most people don't. What's your leadership style? How do you like to work with your leadership team and perhaps even the level below that, especially in a remote environment?
Yeah, the remote environment helps and hurts, all of this, but it forces us all to be, more deliberate in communication. I like written updates. I like to be able to think through things, not just get in a room and yell and make rash decisions. And it forces us to slow down a little bit, communicate more clearly, align on things up front, but then go and execute and check in and monitor along the way. Jensen does a lot of that too. You can read a lot of his management style, but aligning around a plan up front and then adjusting and helping unblock along the way. I have somewhere around 12, 13 direct reports. It goes up and down depending on what's going on.
What are key things you look for when you hire somebody in a leadership role?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing I took for granted, especially as we started this and after my time at Google, was that everyone knew how to work in a written culture. I'd just been there for so long, I didn't know there were other ways of working. Where 10 people would just get into a room, yell, everybody would remember the decision on the way out, and none of it would ever get written down and communicated to people that weren't there for that. I think that's one of the biggest things, just not just in leaders, but in anybody being able to work at a company like this.
Yeah.
As you looked ahead to the future of work and all of this, I do think had I not been in an office my first couple jobs, learning everything, it would have been a lot harder. I do kind of wonder how entry-level jobs and roles and people without industry experience are going to pick up those skill sets without having somebody more senior sitting next to them that can answer questions all day. But that's a problem for the people hiring, 3,000 new grads a year to figure out, not us.
Before we move into the rapid fire section, just one additional question on Chainguard. Dan, if you fast forward 3-5 years, what's your vision for Chainguard? What would success look like? What energizes you? I'm sure that vision energizes you and your team every day. Just share a bit more about that, please.
Yeah, we talked a little bit earlier about the tension between, are we a security company, but we're selling to developers? How do we think through that? We're building a product that developers have to use, whether it's a security product or not. And I want to be seen as the best way to build software, not just the most secure one or the safest way. And it's such a critical choke point that we're sitting at, the way developers are getting their open source code, which you mentioned is 90 to 95% of the code they're using. We have an opportunity to do so much more than just patch these CVEs and make their CISOs happy. There's things we can do to make it run faster, make it integrate better with all the other open source they're using, make it easier to use inside of the environments that they're running it in. I want to get to a point where developers are buying it whether or not they care about security. Then you can stop putting us on these cybersecurity podcasts and everything, and we can stop pretending to be a cybersecurity company at that point.
The Software 60 podcast perhaps next time.
Yeah.
No, I love that vision. It's using the product not because it's the safer, more trustworthy product, because it is the better product, period. Love that vision. That's what energizes us. And so really appreciate your partnership on that. I want to move into my favorite section, which is a bunch of rapid fire questions.
Right. Whenever we do this, we always ask, what's your Uber rating? What's your Chipotle order? We've got a bunch of these we do internally here.
This might not be as interesting, but they're certainly interesting to me. All right, let's start. What's the biggest risk you took at Chainguard?
Aside from just starting the company, I think it was making that pivot you talked about earlier and shutting down a product that looked like it was working to focus on one that we didn't have the metrics for yet.
Yeah, I would agree with that. That was such a big shift. I mean, even as an outsider getting to know you at the time, I was like, wow, this is a pretty big decision. But it worked out, which is great. One decision you'd do differently if you could just rewind the clock at Chainguard?
I think it was that one. I think we would have made that decision 6 months earlier.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. We ended up making it based on gut. We had that gut feeling for a while. We didn't end up getting more data. But we'd be 6 months farther ahead right now.
Okay. On this next one, you can't bring up the same example. Your proudest moment as a CEO? It can't be that.
Sure. Yeah. We've been scaling a lot. We had a rough quarter at the start of this year, and we bounced back, and we fixed a lot of the mistakes. But we do an engagement survey twice a year at the company. Everyone does that, those kind of anonymous feedback surveys and everything. And this year, when we got through with all of our employees, it was a month after that bad quarter that we had, and I expected it to just be a bloodbath, but it wasn't. The questions around confidence in leadership, confidence in our mission, understanding how your work aligns, they'd increased from last time. And I think that was my proudest moment recently. It just showed how bought in the team was on the mission, the vision, understood the why, understood what we were doing to come back from it. And we're still fired up and ready to fix things.
I got to give you credit, Dan. That it's not just that moment. It's how that all the things we've been talking about, the mission of the company, the fact that you've been able to maintain that kind of culture in a remote-only environment is just incredible, and certainly something I wanted to highlight today as well. Book or a podcast or a resource you'd recommend to other founders?
The favorite book I've read lately, and especially for anyone that doesn't have much of a go-to-market background, it's John McMahon's book, That Qualified Sales Leader. It's incredible. I don't think I would have gotten much out of it if I read it, the first day starting the company. But after a few years of watching and learning how enterprise sales works, it was incredible. I still think about that book and recommend it every day.
I could not agree more. And I also agree. I didn't think about this, but I agree that if you've had a little bit of experience with go-to-market, then you read it, you're like, oh my God, I was doing everything wrong. And especially like that section at the end where it's just like a series of questions that here are the things you got to do. And so
I read
very,
it in like
very actionable.
2 days. It goes by so fast. Yeah.
Most common mistake you see founders making today?
I don't like to go tell other people they're making mistakes. Everyone's running their own company. I'm not sitting in there every day watching what they're doing. But I think the biggest one to watch out for is just make sure you understand all elements of the business. Don't be okay, just not understanding how certain parts of it work.
If you weren't building Chainguard, what problem would you be tackling right now?
I'd be working on the same thing. There's an alternate universe where I never got that text from Matt, and I'm still sitting at Google doing all this stuff, or probably AI now since they've reassigned everyone to that. But yeah.
That's true passion. I love it. Dan, thank you so much for taking the time with us today. I know we'll be watching closely as Chainguard continues to shape how all software is built and trusted. It's very exciting to be on this journey for you. I, for sure, am deeply, deeply appreciative of your partnership. Thank you for your trust, and thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me on.